Drummer Paul Wells is a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania native who has been in New York City for many years and has played many gigs since he arrived. He is currently touring internationally with the singer Corea Stigers and is a member of Vince Giordano's Nighthawks. He's also performed and or recorded with Deborah Harry, Joe Williams, the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, Wynton Marsalis, Elvis Costello, Diana Krall, Mark Murphy, Nellie McKay, Kristen Chenoweth. It goes on and on. He's also made the soundtracks, Killers of the Flower Moon, The Irishman, Joker, Boardwalk Empire, and The Marvelous Maisel. Paul is a professor of jazz drums at the Juilliard School, a contributing writer for Modern Drummer magazine, and endorses Yamaha drums, Zildjian cymbals, Remo drumheads, Vickforth drumsticks, and Audis headphones. Greetings and welcome back to my channel. I am here today with Paul Wells. How are you, Paul?
I'm good, Ken. How you doing?
Awesome. Paul's been on the channel before. He's a well-known drummer here in the city, and he's very infrequently at home, which we are today at his home in Brooklyn. And tell me what you're up to, Paul. What have you just done, and what's upcoming, drum-wise?
Excuse me. Well, I was on the road much of this year, mostly with Curtis Stigers, but also a handful of gigs with other people. And I'm just about to do some subbing on Broadway, which will be fun. That's a first for me, and I'm going to be subbing on the show What a Wonderful World, which is a Louis Armstrong.
And it really draws on your unique skill set acquired, I guess, through the whole Vince Giordano thing.
That show particularly, yeah, because the Louis Armstrong show has a lot of early jazz, has a lot of sort of 1920s and early 30s jazz, and also some sort of later swing-oriented playing. Basically, you know, just the stuff that we know Louis Armstrong for. Do they bother with, like, period correct, like calfskin heads, or does any of that matter? So I'm subbing for the great drummer Ulysses Owens.
Oh, wow.
It's Ulysses' chair, and Ulysses put together a really great kit. He was experimenting a little bit with vintage drums, but they found that newer drums in sort of vintagey sizes and tuning with calfskin replica heads basically was the way to go for this show.
What are calfskin replica heads?
Well, Remo make a head called fiber skin. They make another head called skin tone. Those are, you know, basically plastic heads that are meant to replicate calfskin in both look and feel and sound. But Ulysses is an Evans drumheads endorser, so they have one, I think it's called the Calf 56. But I've used with Vince Giordano's band, actually, the kit that we use at Birdland, which is one of Vince's kits, has calfskin heads on all of the drums now, actually. I just put a calf head on the snare, which is really fun.
Paul has agreed to talk about some of his favorite drumming records, and where Billy Drummond did 70s records, Paul is doing primarily 80s records, and I looked at the stack, and there's some really rare stuff in here I've never even seen before. And we also are going to do a second video with fusion records, starting out with one of my favorite, the Chick Corea Electric Band. So, Paul, have at it.
Well, yeah, I was really inspired by the series of videos you did with Billy Drummond. Billy is a colleague of mine. We teach together at the Juilliard School, but he's also been one of my very favorite drummers for a long time, basically since I discovered New York jazz. And he did a series of videos, everybody should watch them if you haven't already, on Ken's channel, where, I mean, he covered a lot of ground. It's 3 videos, right? And he covered a lot of ground, but he got really deep in the weeds with records, jazz records from the 70s. This is sort of my takeaway of it. A lot of stuff on like the Strata East label, and just a lot of deep, obscure stuff that I really didn't know much about, and was really inspired by that and want to track down these records. And it's a bit of an age thing, because Billy is a little older than me, and he kind of came of age and became a jazz fanatic and fan, and also started playing professionally in the 70s. I'd say that my love of music really kind of dawned in the 80s and into the early 90s. So I have a real soft spot for that era and for the music of that era. It's very influential to me. And I thought the 80s would be fun to cover with you, because in the 80s, the record companies were still producing a lot of vinyl. people were moving over to CDs, and I think a lot of these records that I'm going to show you actually, most music fans are more likely to have these on CD, I think. So it's fun to see some of these things and to see LP copies of them. I thought I'd start with the sadly recently departed Roy Haynes, the amazing Roy Haynes, who had one of the most unbelievable careers in music history, I'd say. You know, very, very long career, very incredibly diverse and
original.
Original, yeah. I mean, just, you know, one of a kind innovator and influencer, but also extremely versatile. This is one of the earliest records that I heard. Actually, the first record I heard Roy Haynes on was Chick Corea's "Now He Sings, Now He Sobs," and in 1981. Chick put this same trio back together to do trio music on the ECM label. And this is an interesting record. It's a 2 LP set, and on the first LP they basically improvise. It's basically just trio and sort of different combinations of trio and duo improvisation, and some of it gets really far out. And then the second album is the music of Thelonious Monk. They I think Monk hadn't passed yet, and it's actually in the liner notes. I think Chick said that these were recorded before Monk passed. It wasn't necessarily meant as a tribute to him, except that Chick wanted to play that music. Yeah. So, yeah, it's fantastic. And this was one of the early recordings done at Chick's own studio, at Mad Hatter Studios, engineered by Bernie Kirsch, who engineered all of Chick's recordings since the mid-'70s. I think the first thing he worked on for him was the Leprechaun, and Chick kind of, I think, employed him as his sort of like in-house engineer, and Bernie engineered all of the amazing, like also very diverse Chick Corea catalog. He's an amazing engineer. Anyway, yeah, this is amazing recording. Everybody plays great on it, of course, and Roy is brilliant. Next record is a Pat Metheny record called Question and Answer, and this is one that I initially had on CD and eventually found an LP copy of. This is on the Geffen label.
Never seen that on vinyl.
Yeah, right. It's an unusual one to see on vinyl. I've seen it a couple of times.
Wow.
Really, really fantastic record, of course, and oh man, I mean, Roy just sounds unbelievable on this, and everybody plays great. And yeah.
How's the sound? Is it kind of distant and far away, or is it immediate?
It's a little thin sounding,
right?
Which I think, you know, for some reason was kind of a vibe that engineers and artists were going for in the 80s. I think as like technology improved and clarity improved in recording technology, I think a lot of engineers and artists and producers went for this ultra clarity sort of thing, and sometimes at the expense of warmth and fullness.
Solid state boards instead of tube boards.
Probably, yeah. And I think this is probably before you get into digital recording. It's maybe possible this was a digital recording, but I don't think that actually makes a huge difference. I've heard analog recordings that sound super thin. I've heard digital recordings that sound super fat. So
but there is something about those 80s recordings.
Sometimes. Yeah. Some of them, not all of them. But this is one that's a little thin, but it's such a great record. I mean, I just don't care. The drums are very, Roy is such a dynamic player, and the drums are very dynamic and very, at times when he would play a certain thing that would really jump out, the drums really kind of hit you in your face on this record, which I love. One thing too about, sorry to interrupt you, about having these on LP, it's sometimes just nice to see, you know, a big version of the album cover art that I was used to seeing this as a little, whatever, 4-inch square.
Right.
And the back cover album art, and yeah, it's just nice to have.
Metheny does all his own cover art. That's why all the covers sort of look the same. They're all collages.
Oh wow! So he puts them together. He's like the art director.
He's the art director. He probably doesn't do the technical work, but those are all his ideas for all those covers.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, interesting. Next drummer I want to talk about was Jack DeJohnette, of course, and Jack, in some ways, I don't want to say he came of age in the 80s because he always sounded amazing, and I'm a huge fan of 60s Jack recordings and Jack's recordings with Miles and all of the amazing stuff on CTI and then ECM in the 70s. Really brilliant, but I do really have a particular love for some drummer friends of mine talk about this sort of like 80s, 90s Jack recording at Power Station thing. Jack was, sort of maybe the top call guy who was doing a lot of records, both as a leader and as a sideman in the 80s, and was often doing these sort of bigger budget jazz records, which were recorded at one of the top studios, which was still is actually Power Station on 53rd Street, I believe it is, 54th Street. I've recorded a lot of soundtrack stuff there. It's an amazing room. Jack recorded a lot of fantastic jazz records there, and the first one of which we got to talk about is Michael Brecker's debut record, and I mean this is, I don't know, probably it's easily a top 10 record for me of all time. It's such a fantastic record, really amazing writing. Brecker's writing on this is fantastic. Don Grolnick wrote some stuff. It's extremely well recorded. Everybody plays brilliantly. It's a really cool combination of musicians. It's Kenny Kirkland on piano, Pat Metheny, Charlie Hayden, Jack DeJohnette, and of course
amazing.
Michael Brecker.
One of my top 10s too.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and of course sounds amazing on LP, and it does say digital, so maybe this was a digital recording, but this doesn't sound thin or any of the sort of digital stuff we think of. It has a lot of clarity, but it's certainly the drum sound is very
James
fat, very
Farber.
earthy. Yeah, it is Farber, isn't it?
Yeah, he's just, I mean...
Yeah, recorded and mixed by James Farber.
We have an interview coming out in Stereophile, and
I saw that,
he was telling me on this record, they put a chorus on Charlie Hayden's bass, because Charlie wanted the bass to sound bigger.
Oh, wow.
So they put a chorus on the bass, and you can sort of hear that because it's really deep.
Oh, that's interesting.
Fat.
Wow, interesting. Huh. Well, definitely a great record. I love the last tune on this is Original Rays, which is a funny it's a funny tune name because I got this when I was still in high school and sort of lived with this album for years and thought that the title Original Rays was talking in some way about, sunshine, rays of sunlight, I don't know what, but some sort of like visual, like, but no, it's Original Rays is the pizza place, of course.
I never thought about that till you said it.
Yeah, right? See, I never thought of it that way. Another album recorded a few years later, I think in '89, is John Scofield's record Time on My Hands. This is another one with Jack, recorded at Power Station. This is the beginning of the John Scofield-Joe Lovano collaboration. They played together a lot, collaborated on a lot of records, and Lovano was a member of Scofield's band for quite a while. They toured together a lot, and this is the beginning of that. Also Charlie Hayden on bass. This is an interesting one as well because it was produced by Peter Erskine, who we'll get to later. Peter is another very influential drummer for me. And yeah, it's another fantastic record. There's, I think, only one tune that Jack solos on. There's a tune called, it might not even be on here because the CD has a lot of extra tracks. Yeah, it's actually not on here, is it? Fat Lip, I think is what it's called. Sort of a funky tune. And Jack plays a great solo on that. But he's brilliant on this whole record. And this is sort of the beginning of him this is when his Jack DeJohnette Sabian signature cymbals came out, which were super, super dry sounding. So it's like super strong stick and not a lot of sustain. So it's just kind of like this amazing, very precise sort of ping, which contrasts with Jack's looseness, his sort of inherent looseness that he plays with, but with this sort of very precise sort of cymbal sound. It's actually a really interesting juxtaposition. So you hear that very beautifully recorded. This is probably also James Farber, isn't it? I need my glasses. If I'm going to read any of this small print. Yeah, James Farber, Power Station, November 1989. So this just just about gets it into the 80s. It's almost a 90s album. I wanted to include one of Jack's records because I really dig his band Special Edition. There's a few different versions of it, but the version in the 80s, there's a lot of really great videos on YouTube of him playing with this group around 88, 89, I think 91, 92. And I saw Jack with this group in Pittsburgh, and he actually borrowed, what was the situation? Oh, it was a local drum store lent him drums, like he rented drums, a sonar kit, and they asked me to go to the sound check and make sure that everything was okay with the drums, because they knew I was a Jack DeJohnette fan and I might have a better idea of what Jack wanted from the drums. And of course they were totally fine, but I got to meet Jack, and he showed me some prototypes of the redesigned Jack DeJohnette signature cymbals. So it was really fun to get to do that and to get to hear him close up. But yeah, this is Irresistible Forces. Yeah, and this has a great picture on the back. This is why, one of the reasons why we want LPs, because we get a very big version of this very cool photo. So yeah, this is a very influential record. Pat Metheny, 80-81. Of course, this fits into our 80s theme really well. It's Michael Brecker and Dewey Redman both playing on this record, which is very interesting. Pat, Charlie Hayden, and Jack DeJohnette. I believe this is another Power Station record. This is a German pressing that I got in Denmark. I found a store in Copenhagen called Soundstation that has, or had, because I bought a lot of them, they had a ton of ECM releases, beautiful, pristine German pressings of them. I'm a fan of the German pressings of ECM records from the 70s and 80s because I think they sound a little better than the American pressings. They have a little bit more, a little fuller sounding, I guess, a little more sort of organic sound, and they tend to be cleaner, they tend to be quieter as well, and sort of in better condition. So I always try to look for those. But yeah, 80-81, it's a great record. Yeah, this is a fun record. This is John Surman, who is a really interesting cat. There's a record called, excuse me, called The Amazing Adventures of Simon Simon. And it's basically a duo record between John Surman and Jack DeJohnette. I actually thought this was a 70s record, but it's actually recorded in January 81. So I wanted to include this. And John Surman is mostly a bari sax player and soprano sax player, and plays both instruments beautifully, but also plays and sort of programs keyboards. And on this record, there's some tunes where he sort of sets up these like arpeggiated sequences on like analog synths, what we think of now as vintage synthesizers, but at the time this was cutting edge technology. And he and Jack kind of blow over these synthesizers vibes, and it's just very, very cool. Good record. Recommend that one. This is a American pressing. I have yet to find a German pressing of this one.
Very hard to find.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, more Jack. This is a Gary Peacock record called Voice from the Past Paradigm. This is a cool record with, I'm going to butcher his name, Tomasz Stanko, a Polish trumpet player who recorded a lot on ECM, Jan Garbarek, and Jack and Gary. This is also from 81. A lot of sort of freer playing on this one, although I wouldn't necessarily call it an avant-garde record. Just sort of a lot of sections of sort of freer time, and very open sounding because there's no chords, but beautifully recorded, of course. Yeah, this is a highly recommended one. This was, I think ECM reissued this one on vinyl not too long ago. This is an original, not only a German pressing, but apparently a promotional copy. So
cool.
Yeah, this one is one of my very favorite. It's actually supposed to go this way. Very favorite Jack DeJohnette recordings. Dave Holland trio with Steve Coleman on saxophone and Jack DeJohnette, called Triplicate. And this is another one recorded at Power Station. James Farber, March 1988. Man, these guys are they're just killing on this record. This is a really burning record. And I mean, in the space, you know, that you have without chords and with alto saxophone instead of tenor saxophone, kind of gives Jack more space for his sound to kind of open up and be present. This is another recording where you hear his very dry cymbals, you know, sort of very well recorded. And yeah, Jack just has a lot of room to stretch out on this. He's very interactive and yeah.
That's hard to find as well. I've only seen it twice.
Oh,
and
yeah?
I bought it both times. So
Oh, yeah, good.
very
Yeah.
hard to find that.
This is an American
record.
pressing. I would love to have a German pressing of this one too, but I'm happy with this. I mean, I know I say this about everybody, but Tony and Elvin kind of, for me, go, they sort of occupy the top two spots for me as far as favorite drummers. They'll kind of switch back and forth. Sometimes I'll be a Tony is number one and Jack is a Tony's number one and Elvin's number two kind of a mood, or Elvin's number one, Tony's number two. But when I first discovered Tony in the 80s, it was these records, particularly his first record, his first sort of, you know, these are in some ways like comeback records, I guess, because Tony had played with Miles in the 60s, of course. He had his the original Lifetime trio, and Lifetime kind of merged into a few different bands. In the mid-70s, he had the new Lifetime with Alan Holdsworth and Alan Pasqua and Tony Newton. He started playing with VSOP, doing a lot of dates as a sideman. But in the mid-80s, he came back to Blue Note Records. He was signed by Bruce Lundvall. And I think Michael Cascuna had a lot to do with this. And Michael produced some of these records. And he put these bands together really to showcase his compositions. Tony had gotten very, very serious about studying composition and writing music for, I mean, this first one is actually a different lineup, although it has Wallace Roney and Mulgrew Miller, who would go on to become sort of permanent members of Tony's quintet. When you get to the next ones, this is Civilization, and I have Angel Street here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. These are quintet. Yeah, these are quintet records. Wallace Roney, Billy Pierce on saxophones, and Mulgrew Miller on piano. There are a few different bass players that kind of came and went. Charnette Moffat's on some of the stuff, and Robert Hurst.
How would you just describe his playing style at that point?
Well, in some ways bombastic. He's playing big drums. He's playing relatively loud, very powerfully, pretty interactive with the soloist, and you know, he frames his own tunes in a powerful and very big way, very dramatic way, extremely dynamic, but you know, the bigs are very, very big, the softs are very soft. And for some people it can be a bit overbearing. I love it. I'm all in for this stuff. But he is ultimately playing his tunes. These are showcases for his compositions, and the way that he plays on all of these records is the way that he wants to showcase his tunes. So it's really all about the compositions for him, and his playing style on these, I think, is all about framing the tunes in the way that he wants to hear them.
But why do you think I mean, he's an artist, but why do you think he changed his style so drastically?
I think he was very restless. I think he did not want to repeat himself. I think most artists are most interested in what they're doing now and not what they did before. And I wonder if maybe he was a little bit, maybe even slightly resentful that the general jazz fan public was a little bit more receptive and would continue to talk about his playing in the 60s, which of course is brilliant and massively influential. And I'm sure he knew that, but he went ahead. He continued to go ahead. He continued to evolve. He continued to become interested in new things. And I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't completely thrilled that people weren't always on board with what his new thing was. Right. And that's a bummer. I love this stuff. I love all of his playing. I saw him only once. I saw him do drum clinics a few times, which was mind-blowing in its own way. But I saw him, one of his very last, if not his very last gig, he played trio at Birdland in 1996. And I don't know if this was maybe when you saw him too. Just trio with Mulger Miller and Ron Carter.
Wow.
And he got really criticized. There was a New York Times review that really criticized him from that gig for playing too loud.
But I think he was loud with Miles.
Well, the thing is, I actually had an opportunity to ask Ron Carter about this. I don't think that Tony would have ever played in a way that he couldn't hear everybody on the bandstand and he couldn't interact with everybody on the bandstand. And in the Miles days, there were no bass amps, there were no stage monitors, so he, as busy and big as it sounds, he was still clearly interacting with everybody on stage. You clearly hear, if you listen to the recordings from the European tour with Miles in 1967, it sounds like he's playing loud, but he also, you specifically hear him respond immediately to things that Ron does or things that Herbie does. So he's not playing so loud that he can't hear those guys. So
that's a really good point.
Yeah.